Hey, it's Ben, and welcome to the Upgraded Executive Podcast, where my good friend Nick and I discuss the tools, techniques, and strategies that you can use to upgrade your own personal and professional performance. We have recorded the first 10 shows, and we will be releasing these over the coming weeks, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. In this episode, Nick and I are discussing stress. Firstly, what are the causes and problems associated with stress? And secondly, ways to mitigate stress, achieve more balance in pressure situations, and maximize performance.
Hey Ben, how you doing?
Oh, great. Thanks, Ben. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. So for this podcast, we're talking about stress today.
Yes, which is massive, absolutely massive.
It is, yeah. I think if you look at stress these days, it's the most common thing that people go to their doctors for these days. And I think it's now starting to take many forms. And I think that as a human race in general, I think we're under far more stress now than we've ever been in the history of time.
Yeah. I mean, I've looked at various stats for this. Some go as high as to say 90% of what is taking people to see their doctor is a stress-related illness. It's huge. And I think, we're both going to talk through personal experience here, but it's really important to just talk through what people's perception of normal is and isn't, because some people don't know that they're in a stress state and they think that is their normal. So hopefully the listeners will get quite a lot out of this episode, just in terms of what they are experiencing, and maybe that's quite unhealthy, and then simple strategies to help overcome that.
Yeah, I also think, Ben, there's a big egotistical play here too, particularly around men who don't want to talk about their emotions.
Sure.
Many men in particular, and I'm sure it relates to women too, but I think it's more dominant with men around their ego. They see stress as being a good thing.
Sure.
So stress is what gets me out of bed in the morning, and what motivates me to go to work and close the deals and help me sort of. People feel as though, like, if you took away the stress, they wouldn't be as effective in work. I had a really interesting question from somebody in the audience yesterday when I was giving a talk to a bunch of salespeople. The question was, what is good stress?
Yeah.
So the analogy that he was saying is, before I start a sport, I might feel some stress, some anxiety.
Yeah.
That's a good thing, right? And what I tried to explain is that stress is really an ancient response that we have, and it triggers something called the freeze, fight, or flight response.
Yeah.
So when you get stressed, you either come out fighting, you either freeze like a rabbit in the headlights, or you run away.
Yeah.
And those are not healthy states to be in.
Yeah.
And actually, before some kind of tournament sport thing, it's not stress you're feeling, it's the anticipation, it's the excitement, it's the what's going to happen. You've got the adrenaline rush going on. And personally, I don't think there is a healthy stress when it comes to stress relating to the freeze, fight, or flight response.
So I think there's three basic stresses. One is a physical stress, so somebody's had an accident, an injury, or fall. There's a chemical stress, so that might be bacteria. And there's an emotional stress, and that's what we're going to discuss in terms of this episode. So emotional stress, and all of them knock out our brain and our body out of balance, but it's the emotional stress that we're talking around. I think depression is when somebody's dwelling on the past and that's all they're thinking about, and anxiety is when somebody is thinking about the future and worried about the future. And what you just said there in terms of fight or flight, which go back to caveman days, in terms of, I've seen a saber-toothed tiger, what am I going to do? I'll run like the absolute wind, and that's all my energy and focus is doing. So nowadays when we perceive a threat, so it could be something happened at school and there's that instant activation of the adrenal system, and we go into that fight or flight mode, and it releases adrenaline into the body. So we're mobilizing resources from around the body, from the gut, into our immune system. And we're putting energy into muscles to fight for our life, a bit like back in the day running away from a saber-toothed tiger. And that's what we're talking around when we're talking around fight or flight. And the body is using so much energy when it's in that stress state that it has a big knock-on impact in terms of everything else.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think when we go into a freeze, fight or flight response, so when we get triggered in some way, our blood becomes more acidic, our skin becomes more acidic, our body is more focused on keeping us alive, so our immune system drops, our cortisol goes up. It's not a healthy place to be in, particularly, let's be honest, Ben, we can't mitigate stress in lives completely. Yeah, we're always going to have an element of stress going on, but it's this sort of continual chronic stress that happens day after day, week after week, is what's really, really, really making people have, either sort of short-term performance issues in work, or then it's turning into sort of more longer-term issues, as you mentioned, like anxiety, depression, mental health issues, and now, really sadly, the biggest killer of men under 40 is suicide. Yeah, and that's shocking.
It affects memory, it affects concentration. It's hard to digest food. It's difficult for the body to eliminate toxins properly, and the immune system's compromised. And when we're in that stress state, as you just said, over a period of time, it's not good at all in terms of functioning normally. And it's a slippery slope, and I've been there. It's not good at all. But there is good news, because there's lots of different strategies that we can talk around in terms of how to elevate that state.
Absolutely. I think, spilling on your point there, I think that we've been talking about like the serious consequences that stress can manifest itself into. But when you're in a stressed state and you're not thinking logically about the situation, that is really going to impact your performance in your working day, because you don't have the clarity of thought to make the right decisions. And also, those are the times where you either get snappy with your work colleagues, or even worse, you come home stressed, you come in through the front door and you're snappy with your wife, your partner, your children. And you're not in that, you're not present in the home environment because you sort of got the stress of work.
Yeah.
So I think there's probably two dimensions for listeners to think about here, is that yes, there is a potential long-term consequence, but actually it's not serving you here and now, and stress will never serve you.
Yeah. And the first podcast that we recorded was around sleep, and sleep and stress are completely interlinked. If I've been stressed before and I haven't been managing it, that affects my sleep. If I haven't been sleeping well, that has a knock-on effect with how stressed I'm feeling, and that's a definite downward spiral. And exactly what you've just said, if we're looking at optimizing personal and professional performance, these are two of the three key pillars, trilemma to absolutely nail. And again, it's all in our control, which is great news, but they're completely interlinked, and getting all of them, or if all of them are off, then it can be a really large negative down spiral into depression, to anxiety. And I've definitely had mental health issues for quite a period of time previously before I recognised what state I was in, and then strategies in terms of helping to become better.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Ben. I think there is the risk, and a large risk, of a downward spiral. And I think that what the listeners will get to understand is that these 10 episodes really interlink and build on top of one another, and to get the full benefit, listen to all 10. Listening to one will give you some gains. It's great gains once you listen to all 10. And I think that is sort of the antidote to the downward spiral. And I think that when you recognize you're in that downward spiral, you've got to do many of the things we're talking about on this podcast to reverse that trend, and then start the rebuild process.
And I think I speak for both of us, we're not making any apologies for some duplication, and only be some in terms of these strategies, because they are all interlinked. But it's really important that if people really optimize their personal and professional performance, one, they listen to them, but there's a common theme amongst a lot of them, and the suggestion is to implement those common themes.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, should we talk about how we recognize stress? So how do we recognize we're in a stressed state? Because I think many of the listeners will be thinking, yeah, I've got some stress going on, I've got some stuff going on in my personal life, and work's really busy, but that becomes their new norm.
Sure.
And they're able to deal with that level of background stress. But how do people realize and recognize they're in a state where there's too much stress?
Yeah, sure. So personal experience, it's not one thing, it's a combination of a number of things, and then what the outcomes are. And you touched on them a few minutes ago, but let's start with sleep. So when I've in a heightened state of stress and prolonged stress, my sleep's been really broken. So I've struggled to go to bed, to actually fall asleep. And when I do, it's a really inconsistent and broken night's sleep. So I previously might have woken up at 2 or 3 or 4 a.m. and been thinking about stuff that's happened in the past or stuff that might happen in the future. And I am wired at that point in time, which totally isn't healthy. So I might wake up at 2 and then not be able to get back to bed because I'm literally wide awake for 2 hours. And then I'll feel awful when the alarm's gone off at 6, and it'll be a massive effort to actually get out of bed. And I will not start the day off in the right frame of mind if I've had that quality or lack of sleep thinking about stuff. And that then impacts into the day, and it's a really negative compound effect in terms of that happening. And that's definitely what I tolerated for years, and I used personally exercise as a leveler to reduce that, but I didn't really deal with the root causes. And during my day, what was the knock-on impact from having an awful night's sleep? I just wasn't on it. I struggled with focus. I struggled with articulating what I was trying to say. I struggled with completing tasks. And I speak as an entrepreneur and somebody that had a successful business. I wasn't the best version of myself. And that impacted in terms of being present. So that's at work, and massively in terms of my family and around my friends. And interestingly, I think, because I spoke to one of my best mates recently, and he said, because I feel great now, better than I've ever been, you don't look any different. And I said to him, yeah, you wouldn't see a difference probably, because this is all internally. It's all stuff that's going through my head. I mean, he might have noticed if I was feeling tired or I had large rings around my eyes. But that's personally how I felt. And that isn't in an optimum performance zone. That's me struggling in terms of just trying to get through the day, trying to get up, and trying to move life forward. So that isn't healthy. And that's how I was, I think, for 13, 14 years on and off in that kind of state. And that was my normal. Yeah. And like I used exercise to dull some of that, which was helpful. And we'll talk around that. I had some real underlying issues.
I think sleep is a great trigger to recognize when you're stressed. So if you're not sleeping well and there's no other external factors like children or external noise, then something going on within you. So I think stress can be a really good, so I think poor sleep can be a really good indicator of stress. I think some other things could be, if you are using alcohol too much to try and reduce stress, if you're using and self-medicating on any other things in order to be able to reduce stress, those sort of warning flags to you that there's something going on and you're at a heightened level of stress. The other thing that's probably a more subtle but is equally as effective is if you have some kind of routine in your life that is a positive reinforcement of your physical, mental, emotional health, and that thing slips away, And that could be going to the gym. It could be meditating in the morning. It could be something as simple as journaling and expressing gratitude on your commute to work. Anything that is a positive thing in your life that starts to fade away, 90% of the time is due to stress, because you're worried about the day ahead and what you have to do, and you're thinking. And unfortunately for people, when they're in that state, the first thing that disappears are the positive things, where they need things more than ever.
I totally echo that, in terms of, if I've been in that state, which I have been, my diet choices are poor. My choices around alcohol, I'm using that maybe as a crutch, and stuff that I had enjoyment from would easily drop off because I didn't have an interest. And that might have been the thing that was really helpful in terms of me keeping in my day routine, in terms of meeting friends or exercising. Something that was enjoyable and good for me would just naturally don't have an interest in doing that anymore, which would then further compound this downward spiral.
Yeah. One of the interesting things now, Ben, is that people can actually measure how stressed they are.
Okay.
There's a measurement in our bodies called heart rate variability. And what this does is it measures the variation in our heartbeats. Okay, so if your heartbeat was beating once every second, what you need to be doing is ideally beating like 0.998 seconds, or then 1.03 seconds, and then maybe 0.99 seconds. So you've got variability in how your heart is beating. If you look across the whole minute, the average is 60 beats per minute. Okay. What that high heart rate variability indicates is that your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system are in alignment, and that we're in a de-stressed state. If your heart is beating every single second on the money, that's indicating that you're in a stressed state and you've probably activated your freeze, fight, or flight response.
Yeah.
So what you can do is you can measure your heart rate variability. I believe you can do this on an Apple Watch now.
Okay.
You can also wear a chest strap.
Yeah.
Or you can use a device such as this from a company called HeartMath, where you clip this on your ear.
Yeah.
And it measures your heart rate variability. And then what you can do is you can use an app, and actually you can use positive thoughts and breathing exercises to actually change your heart rate variability. Well, I think we will come on to this more in a second, but there are ways now through measuring your HRV that you can get a baseline of your background stress levels, and then actively try and do things to recognize when you're in a stress state and take you out of the stress state position.
I think one other thing to add in terms of how does somebody recognize that they might be stressed is their thoughts are more negative than positive, and those thoughts then turn into beliefs, and those beliefs then turn into habits, and those habits then turn into actions. So again, if somebody can take a step back and recognize what they're thinking, and thinking is that positive or negative, that can be an indication of how somebody, what stress state somebody's in.
I think that is a brilliant point. That's a really brilliant point. Because, we spend so much time living in our heads. Okay. And by that, I mean, sometimes it can feel that we've got the angel on our shoulder and the devil on our shoulder. And it can be as simple as, the angel saying, go to the gym, the devil saying, nah, don't, go out and have some beers, enjoy yourself. And sometimes we have these sort of internal chats in our minds where it feels like, feels almost weird that we're looking at two sides of our conscious having a conversation. And I think we can have so much negative chat going on internally. That means we're living in our head so much, rather than getting out of our head, getting more into our bodies, and just being present and actually recognizing what those voices are. They are not really us. Yeah, it's a level of chatter that's going on inside us that is either trying to keep us safe or protect us, or is worried about the future. And I think that the more that we can do to try and get in a much more present state, those voices, I think, get quieter and quieter.
Yeah, I find this subject really interesting from a multitude of levels, because I work with people in terms of reducing their stress levels as well as installing or changing beliefs. And interestingly, it's not our fault. The subconscious is hugely more powerful than the conscious. So stuff that is habitual, that's in the program of the subconscious, is every day going to overpower what's in the conscious. So the conscious operates at 40 beats per second, subconscious at 40 million. So it's no contest. So if we've got a hardwired belief, that's our default. That's our go-to. So somebody can, to an extent, have positive affirmations, but if they haven't dealt with a belief that's pre-wired, that's going to be the default. That's going to be the go-to. And that's where I was previously. It's interesting, when we're children up to the age of 7, that's when the brain is operating at theta, and it acts like a sponge. So show me a child at 7 or 8, and you can see the adult with a lot of the habits and the characteristics. We can change those, but if we're not aware of this programming, then it's very difficult to do that. Which is why I'm really conscious with my twin 3.5-year-olds. The environment around them and what I'm saying is absolutely going to have a huge impact on them moving forward as adults.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's quite a nice segue into, I think, a really important point here. I think we are going to go on to talk around some of the things that you can do to mitigate the impact around stress on a day-to-day basis. But I also think for any of the listeners that really feel as though they're under some chronic stress, they should go out and seek professional help. Whether that's through a counsellor, whether that's initially through something like the Samaritans, go out and have a conversation with somebody that can help you here and now. A number of things that we will talk about, I guess, are things that you can put in place and are sort of short and medium term practices that will give you a huge amount of benefit and will hopefully keep you on the right side of being stressed, so it never gets to escalate. But I think people who are listening to this and feel, I'm not in a good place, get help.
Yeah, I mean, I did. I didn't know I wasn't well, and equally, I probably didn't want to face up to the fact that mentally I wasn't well, and definitely suffering from heavy depression for years. I thought that was part of running a business and being an entrepreneur. I just thought that was my normal. I thought it was normal to think about the past a lot and worry about the future, and that was the constant state that I was in. And my wife said, go down to the doctor 3 times, and I think I skirted around the subject because I didn't want. I saw it as failing, and it totally wasn't that. And the stuff, there's kind of a 2-prong attack with this, as you've just said. There's some strategies that are great to have in terms of a day routine, and they're 80-90% of this. But as well as seeking professional help on top of that, if it was where I was at, I would definitely advocate that. And that's somebody that's done that.
That's great, because I think, as mentioned, there could be an element of something that's gone on in childhood. There could be things around PTSD. I think, there might be, quite ingrained beliefs and sort of root causes that a professional needs to help you come to terms with and deal with.
So on part of my journey, I had a really, really negative internal chatter. And one of my other close mates said, well, that's a double-edged sword with your personality, Ben, because that's what drives and motivates you. But it went far too the other way. And that's all I heard was negative chatter in terms of my head. And that was causing me to not sleep, and that was just a really downward negative spiral, which was interesting reflecting on it now, because externally I've got everything that I could ever wish for. Lovely wife, 2 beautiful kids, no financial worries, great house. I've got loads of options moving forward. Life's great. It didn't feel like that 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I totally wasn't living in the present. I was either living in the past or I was worried about the future. But I didn't appreciate that.
Yeah, I was in a similar space where I think throughout my 20s and early 30s, working around business transformation programs, there was always deadlines, things had to be done. And, I used to thrive on that level of stress. Okay.
Yeah.
And, it would really energize me and I would get things done. But, I started putting on weight, I put on 3 stone in about 3 years. I wasn't sleeping very well. I wasn't particularly happy in my job. I definitely wasn't present when I was at home. And that's sort of like the low level of continual stress that I was under. And what I found, Ben, was I had a really strong inner critic that was always pushing me to, get a nicer car, bigger house, get more money, be more successful, get a better job, And I think that probably served me through my 20s and early 30s, but I think it was getting to the point where it stopped serving me. And when I did the internal work to really calm down my inner critic, I found I still had the drive, I still had the ambition, but I was the one in control.
Yeah.
Rather than allowing this inner critic subconscious to keep bubbling up and making me feel as though I was inadequate in some way and I had to be better and better and better.
Yeah, through my journey, I refound my why and my motivation. I mean, it was always there, but it's like you said, it elevated it to the point that I didn't have this negative continual voice. I have now just lightness. And 98% it's all good in terms of positive beliefs and affirmations, and that's all my subconscious is now saying. The other stuff I can work on, but it's mostly I'm absolutely present and it's positive, which makes such a massive difference.
Yeah, I think getting in touch with your larger why, and I think it's one of the reasons why I've pivoted from consulting to coaching, because working with individuals one-on-one really plays into my why. Helping somebody make significant shifts gives me a lot of happiness and joy.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with connecting with the why. I guess, Ben, should we shift gears and maybe talk about some of the strategies, tools, and techniques that people can deploy to try and reduce the level of stress they have in their everyday lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say watch the sleep podcast that we've recorded in terms of number one, because if we can get sleep right, then we're a percentage of the way there in terms of the strategies that we talk around there. So for me, this starts the night before, the following day, by aiming to get the best night's sleep possible. And in terms of strategies that I use, that's not taking an iPad or a phone to bed and wasting time, and I will say wasting time, looking at various apps or looking at the news. And personally, the news is not that joyful. It's quite depressing, really, and it induces stress, and it's 24/7. So that's one of the things that I do, which is I'm really aware in terms of getting a good night's sleep and not looking at blue emitting devices, as well as not looking at the news. And that also rolls into the following morning in terms of not looking at any of my devices for at least an hour. So I've got a morning routine that's my routine and not somebody else that's trying to get hold of me or influence me, which starts my day off really well.
Yeah, I think those are two great ones, the night before and then the morning, so that you put yourself in the best possible place that you can. For a great night's sleep and the early morning practices, I think for me, I should have added 2 more things into that list. I think we mentioned it in our podcast around sleep, but building a meditation practice or mindfulness practice that you can do every day for between 15 and 20 minutes is going to make an enormous difference to your stress levels. So it just allows you to quiet the brain down, and then you can then take those practices into your everyday working life. So if you need to take a moment, you can take a moment. And I think for me, meditation has been one of the biggest things that's helped me really get on top of my stress levels and then reduce it. I think the other thing then is the classic one that people go to is, I'm stressed, so I will exercise. And exercise is a great way of relieving stress. But I would just say, don't overdo the exercise. You know, I see so many executives that fly in transatlantic, and then on the weekends they're running triathlons and 100-mile bike rides. And if you're under chronic stress, adding a huge amount of more stress to your life through exercise is not going to do you any good physically.
Yep.
So there's some caution there around, yes, use exercise as a release, but try not to overdo it, particularly when you're in a stressful time.
I think in terms of meditation, and people think that's woo-woo, Tim Ferriss, in terms of tribal mentors, and lots of people who have interviewed high-performing people from across the spectrum, from sports people, politicians to business people, the vast majority spends time every day meditating, and that can mean different things for different people. So for me, I might listen to a guided meditation for 10 minutes to 20 minutes. I might go for a walk. So just being outside, the aim is to quieten down the mind.
Mm-hmm.
So that might mean different things to different people, but that's the aim, to quieten down the mind. And I think if people are put off thinking, I genuinely don't have the time, or what's that all about, I would advocate starting small, even if it's 1 or 2 minutes at a time. That's absolutely fine to start getting a baseline habit. And why is it good? Why is it good? The pituitary gland does amazing things when it's in meditation. So it releases dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, meaning that everything that is good that your body can release, it releases. Mm. So that's why we're advocating it, and we do it ourselves. It just makes you feel really good, and it quietens down the mind. And what's the outcome? It brings the person into the present.
Mm-hmm. I think then you become more used to being in the present, and yes, then during your working day, you tap into that state more often.
Yeah.
I know that from my own personal experience, that on the days where I meditate, my day seems to go a lot better than the days where I don't. And this might be like a subconscious placebo type thing, but I generally do feel that when I'm in the groove meditating every single day, I'm in a much better place mentally and emotionally.
Yeah.
More grounded.
And the headline is meditation relieves stress.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of the brainwave frequency, we normally operate at a beta level, and meditation calms the mind, and we get through to alpha, through to theta, which is a dreamlike state where the mind's really calm. So that's what we're aiming to get.
Absolutely, and I think that many of the listeners would have heard about people talking around how do you get in the flow state. So how do you achieve a flow state where you are focused, you're in the moment, you lose the sense of all time. You might be giving a presentation, you might be doing a creative piece of work like building a presentation, you might be playing music, or you might be playing sport, yeah, where you are in that sort of subconscious state, which is actually, as you described it, you're between the alpha and theta boundary. So the more that you do meditation, and the more you drop yourself from a beta into an alpha state, the more you experience that, the easier people will find it to only relieve stress, but also focus.
Yep.
So meditation's got a multitude of different benefits. I know we're focusing here around stress. There's other things it helps with too.
One of the other things that I advocate, and I didn't fall off my chair, but when one of my close friends said about 9 months ago, practice cold showers, I was quite dismissive. But I do that consistently every day now and love it. So a warm shower followed by a 10-second to a minute cold shower. Why? Again, it gets me back to the present because that's all I'm focused on. And it also helps me focus on my breathing, which is brilliant for, again, being in the present. Because let me tell you, if you put a shower on completely cold, that's all you're focused on.
Yeah, I have done cold showers in the morning now for past 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I would generally have a 5-minute shower and then turn it cold for the last minute.
Yep.
The benefits for me are dual. One, it makes me highly energized. You are focused on being cold because your body thinks I'm going to die, and then it realizes, oh, I'm not going to die.
Yep.
But I think for me, one of the most important things around the cold shower is that every morning, Ben, without fail, I have this conversation with myself in my head where that little voice comes up and says, don't do it. It's really cold. It's not very nice. And you might die. And what I do is, as soon as I get that feeling, I turn it cold straight away. Because what I'm saying to myself is that when I say go, we go.
Yeah.
We take action. And by starting my day doing that, it's a really great intention to have, because we go through life constantly with a little voice or chatter in our mind is trying to hold us back.
Yeah.
What I'm teaching my subconscious is that when my conscious says we're doing it, we're doing it.
Yeah.
So I think that's an added benefit from a stress management point of view too.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, you're winning by a positive outcome straight away. You know, one of the first things you do. So it's a great way to start the day. I also think I borrowed this. There's an amazing video on YouTube. If people Google Navy SEAL Admiral pass out parade, and he advocates making one's bed each day, which is another easy win. But it's something that's great in terms of compounding for minimal effort. Starting the day with a positive intent. So I always make sure that I do that post shower, which is make my bed. And also when I come back at the end of the day, it's nice to have a nicely made bed to come back to.
Yeah, I think, you know, if we start building up some of these small things in the morning, like for instance, you may have a cold shower, okay? You'll make your bed, you will maybe do a 2 or 3 minute meditation. You might express some gratitude or do a journal. So you have a few things that you do as a bedrock every single day that sets you up for success that day.
Absolutely.
When that routine drops, it's a great indicator of stress.
Yes.
I know we mentioned this earlier, but I thought I'd just reinforce that point, because if you can put a sequence of those things in place and make them habitual, it's the best early warning indicator you could ever have.
Sure. And if people are saying they don't have time, I would advocate just setting the alarm 5 minutes or 10 minutes earlier to start including some of this stuff, or taking advantage if they've got a commute and they're on a bus or a train, spending some time to start looking at these practices then.
Yeah.
And equally, if they are on a tube, for example, there may be getting off a stop further, and then walking back from there. So just small stuff that they can do that's not too onerous, but will have massive gains.
Yeah. I think the other thing that people should try and do is try and get as much sunlight as possible. So try and get out in the early morning sunshine, try and get out in the like lunchtime, try and get some sunshine, because we all feel so much better when we've got the sun on our faces. And I think the more that we can do to get outside in the sunshine or in nature, it just lifts our mood tremendously. And I think there is without doubt a biological factor with the sun because of vitamin D.
Yeah.
And most of us are deficient in vitamin D, particularly during the winter time. And I certainly felt it this winter, where I don't have seasonal affective disorder, but I was absolutely craving a holiday in April to Egypt so I could get some proper sun.
Yeah.
And my mood lifted massively. Yeah. And I didn't feel massively down, but I just felt as though, I need some sun. So try and get early morning or lunchtime sun as often as you can.
Yeah. And diet in terms of choices. So I've switched my diet around to predominantly a plant-based diet. Mm-hmm. And ordinarily I wouldn't eat this stuff if it was served on a plate. So I blend a lot of raw vegetables, and that has completely reduced any sugar crashes or a lot of the cravings that I used to have for sugary based food or high fat food. Mm-hmm. And that's made a massive difference in terms of personally my mood and my outlook and my energy levels. So I don't want to be too virtuous in terms of this, but moving towards a plant vegetable based diet has massively worked for me.
Mm. Yeah, I think I'm a big advocate of a plant-based diet. My approach is slightly different, where I eat a small to medium amount of high quality animal protein. Most of my plate is vegetables for my main meal. But I think what you're saying is absolutely right, because we're starting this podcast series with the three most important topics: that's sleep, stress, and next comes energy. Those three things are going to massively impact each other. You get one of those off, it's going to impact the other two. But I think what you're describing there, Ben, is that through improving your food choices, you massively improve your energy levels, which in turn is going to help you become more resilient to stress and help you sleep better too. So these things are so interconnected.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think food that's packaged, I would describe as a product, especially if it's got a really long shelf life, like a bar of chocolate, for example. And that's eating rubbish has definitely personally affected my mood. And if I've done that consistently, then it's turned into a habit, and that's really affected my mood continually. So that's where, in terms of energy levels, absolutely. I think there's been a real knock-on effect with the quality of food that I've been eating previously, which was poor, and what was happening in my head as well.
Yeah, I think we all can relate to times where we have maybe eaten something, we have then had the crash that comes afterwards, particularly with sugar. You feel at a low ebb. And then as soon as something happens in work or home, because you're at a low ebb, the stress impacts you more, and then you have a much more negative reaction. And that then causes more stress, and you probably go and get more sugar and you'll sleep as well that night. So it's all so interconnected.
Yeah.
So should we summarize for the listeners the things that they could do to help mitigate their stress?
I was going to say one more thing, actually. So in terms of one other strategy, it's to have a social network and to keep in touch with that social network. So previously, when I had mental health issues, I've become a hermit, and I've not talked to people, and I've not socialized with people. So now I make a conscious effort to phone people, and that could be just to say, great to have you in my life, and pay them a compliment, which is a nice thing to do. I make a conscious effort to do something socially with my close group of friends each week. Again, it helps keep me present, and it's just nice to socialise and to physically be with people and chat.
Great point. And I think also going back to our previous conversation around how to identify you're in a stressed state.
Yeah.
And maybe that's another thing that people can think about as to when are they not being social, and when are they not keeping their social connections, and maybe use that as a trigger to think what's going on.
And I'm really mindful about clever software companies who design their software products or apps to be highly addictive. for their user base, which I get it. It's their businesses and they want to create a return, but that's how they do it. So in terms of, I'm really aware about what digital media I'm using and when. So I really try and make it so I use it on my terms, as opposed to the company that's trying to make lots of money. So I don't advocate a completely no Facebook, no WhatsApp, no email, but I'm quite structured in terms of when I look at stuff. And I don't feel guilty for doing that then. So I might say, right, I'm going to check my email twice a day, my personal email, or I might spend half an hour looking at YouTube at this point, as opposed to, right, I've done some deep work for between 50 and 90 minutes, and my break is going to be going on Facebook. I just turn off completely. And I allocate some time in the day if I want to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, great, because these things do end up being stressors. Particularly, I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook in particular. I'm in so many different Facebook groups now that add a huge amount of value.
Yeah.
But also, the part of the issue with Facebook is that everybody posts about how wonderful their life is, or everybody posts before they go away on holiday. And I think there's, again, with the news, there's not a huge amount of positive reinforcement that goes on some of these social media platforms. So like you, I try and minimize the amount of time I'm on them and try and schedule that time in. Typically I'll look at Facebook or Instagram, etc., when maybe I have downtime, like the car's being washed, or I'm on the tube, places like that where I feel as though my time's not very useful, so I might delve into social media for a while.
Good stuff.
So Ben, should we recap for the listeners on some of the things that they can do to help manage their stress levels that are either low cost or free?
Sure. So I think the two big ones for me are getting a great night's sleep and the strategies in terms of how to do that. And we talked around meditation and exercise, but whatever that individual needs to do to calm down their mind.
Yeah. I think for me also there is the point around trying to get more sunshine.
Yeah.
Doing the early morning and lunchtime. Also trying to get out in nature as much as possible. I loved your point around the whole community, social connections, and maintaining those.
Yeah. So cold showers, meditating. We talked around a journal. So both in terms of to get out of one's head what their day might look like the following day, as well as a gratitude journal. So really important to talk with family, talk with friends, or write stuff down that one's thankful for. Because again, that it's kept me in the present.
And I think the gratitude piece is something that we've mentioned in the last two podcasts, something that we've not really spoken about specifically. I think it might be worthwhile mentioning this because I think it's probably one of the most impactful things anybody can do. And when we say expressing gratitude, you can do it in various different ways. But what you want to do is you want to feel the gratitude inside you. And it could be the love you have for somebody, you could be very thankful to somebody, or it could just be that you're healthy, or you can feel the wind on your face or the sun on your back. Yeah. But I love the quote from Tony Robbins that says, you can't feel fear or anger and gratitude at the same time. Yeah. And that's so powerful because if you do really feel grateful for something, the stress melts away.
Yeah.
So I think one of the best free things that you can do is start to build in a gratitude practice.
Completely agree. And being conscious about diet choices. So for me, preparation's key. If the hack for me, I've got a blender and I blend vegetables, so it's quick and I can prepare my blends for the rest of the day. And I'm lazy when it comes to food preparation, so it's a quick win for me, and it means that if I'm crashing, I have something that's prepared that I can take, and it's good for me, as opposed to reaching for something that might not be the best choice.
Yeah, no, I think that's. I think diet, as we mentioned, is a great point. I think some of the things that people could look into, and we put some links in the show notes that we won't go deep into. We've mentioned them here that can really help with stress levels. One is flotation tanks,
Yes.
which are sensory deprivation tanks, which for me have been phenomenal for relieving stress. Second one is a therapy called EMDR. So if you do have some kind of chronic stress and past trauma, seeking out a specialist in your area that is a EMDR practitioner could be massively helpful. And then probably the most ultimate tool in this area is neurofeedback training, where you're actually able to train your brain and rewire beliefs, and also enable your brain to drop down into that alpha state that we were talking about.
Yeah.
And there will be neurofeedback centers in the local area. They're being used now for a whole bunch of different things, from managing brain conditions to ADHD and autism and stress and anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
So we put some links in the show notes where the listeners can go there and then start to explore some of these other therapies.
Yeah, so I would also add to that, a 3-1 is positive affirmations or mantras. But as I was saying before, that's great, and I'm not knocking those at all. If somebody has habitual subconscious programming that's negative, positive affirmations will only get that person so far, and I speak from experience. So how does somebody rewire their subconscious program? They can learn something by rote, and I'd say that's quite difficult. If somebody does something 1,000 times, they will get into a habit with it, and it will become habitual. They can have hypnotherapy, which works, and there's lots of other modalities available if people look up how to reframe the subconscious, so how to get the mud out of the system, reduce stress, as well as changing beliefs. Personally, I advocate, which is why I facilitate in Psych, which is great in terms of reducing stress, as well as changing subconscious beliefs. So that's an option for people to look into also.
Brilliant.
Thank you for listening, and we hope that you enjoyed this show. You can find the video, audio, and detailed show notes at www.upgradedexecutive.com. At the end of this 10-episode podcast series, we will send all of our subscribers an exclusive ebook which summarises everything that Nick and I discuss on the shows. Be sure to leave your details on our website. You can also find us on all of the social platforms at Connect with UE.